All right, good morning. Today is February 19th, 2025, and I'm running 1 minute late today. No big deal. No big deal at all. So, hope everybody had a good long President's Day weekend. And the funny thing is, ever since, this usually happens around holiday weekends, but ever since the President's Day weekend, with today's Wednesday, market's been pretty dull. There hasn't been a lot of action, which is unusual because it was kind of crazy prior to this. So, speaking of which, if you look at today so far, it's like this little tiny, you can barely even see it there. There we go. A little tiny doji. So, this is sort of what I'm talking about. Yesterday was kind of weird. And of course, this was Friday. This was last week. So, if you checked out last week's show, you'll recall that I finally drew another trend line here. So I just expanded this box this morning. And the interesting thing is that, I mean, the market's basically at the all-time highs in the history of the world. S&P, I should say, is at the all-time highs in the history of the world. And the big debate now is whether it's going to bust out of here and make a move, or whether it's kind of stalled out and going to pull back a little bit. What's even more interesting is that we're trapped in this little zone here. So let's see, that was January. I mean, this box that I drew, it's been a few weeks that we've been trapped in this zone, but geez, you can go back to this is the beginning of December of last year. And as you can see, my little line here, basically we're still sort of in that area of that all-time high. So you can see December 6th there is a date. And basically, yeah, so December 6th was the date it hit the all-time high. And I mean, we're still literally in that very same range. So my point is that the market basically just appears to be range bound here. So which is kind of not unusual at the all-time highs. Um, there's a couple of other interesting spots here. Back over here, I have all these levels drawn. These are basically like resistance levels and support levels that I have drawn on the chart here. But you can see that several times the market ran up, made a new high, and then pulled back. Look at where that 50-day moving average is, though. The interesting thing about where it is right now, let me go to a weekly chart here, is you remember this weekly chart from, I think it was last week, I brought this up. I talked about how by virtue of the market just trading sideways, it could potentially break this really steep uptrend line. Look at the duration of, and this of course is the rally right after the pandemic sell-off. Look at the duration of that, and it looks to me like we're about 75% roughly off the top of my head, just going by visually what I see here. And so it's a very similar pattern and a similar sort of angle. There's a lot of similarities to it, so it's going to be interesting to see. But when you do look at this weekly chart, and let me see if I have a different weekly chart here. Well, that one's not nearly as pretty. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, this is what I was looking for, though. Just a nice weekly candlestick chart. Basically, you can see that on the weekly chart, I mean, the market's just poised to sort of break out of this flat top, this flat top pattern, right? Like basically 3 out of the last 4 weeks, not including this week, the highs are just right there. So instead of drawing an actual line on it, I kind of like the idea of a rectangle. So, this weekly chart is basically just like coiled up for the market to bust out, and or there's two ways to look at it, and quite frankly, it's impossible to know what's going to happen. I mean, you can have an opinion on it, but might as well save that. It's impossible to know whether it's going to bust out, take another leg up. That seems like the most obvious thing, but nothing happens quick on a weekly chart. We could have a couple of down weeks. We could have a little bit of a pullback. It's just impossible to know. What wouldn't surprise me is, and I'm sure there's tons and tons of stops just overhead. So I'm going to say that we're in no man's land here. And the other thing I wanted to point out was there's only been actually one trading day this week, and so that's why the range is so small. Um, it seems to me that there's a lot of there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential. How do I want to say it? Macro sort of issues, right? I mean, today the Fed minutes come out, and we've learned that basically the Fed is probably on hold, and the rate cuts that everyone was expecting are most likely not going to happen. There may or may not be any more rate cuts this year, and chances are the rate cuts will come if the economy slows down. So it's kind of a weird environment, but I'm reminded, of course, that the the market is not the economy, because if it was, I don't think it would be up here. And we've talked about how valuations are excessive too. So it's like a game of chicken. But the other thing is that, and the funny thing is, I mentioned this a long time ago, and I've mentioned it recently, and I've all of a sudden I've seen others start to mention the idea that, with the strength in the US dollar, and the US is just sort of the place to be for everybody on the planet because they want to own US stocks priced in US dollars, and I think that's helped our market a lot. It really has. So, yeah, zoom back a little bit on this weekly chart. I mean, from a purely objective point of view, this is a pretty bullish looking chart, right? Even if it does come in a little bit. So, the interesting thing about this is that basically on the weekly chart, basically like that trend line there, I mean, as long as the market stays above this trend line, then it's all good, right? I mean, even if it did come in a little bit and we had some zigs and zags, I mean, we could get a clean breakout here, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a little bit of, over the next few weeks, there's likely to be some price action that occurs, in between this breakout zone and this rising trend line. So I'm gonna save that just so I can come back and look at it. The problem is that, like I said, we're kind of in no man's land here. Um, we can poke out of here a little bit. I'd kind of be surprised, but hey, you never know. It seems like the market's waiting on some news, and I have a feeling that the news today at 2 o'clock, when the Fed minutes come out, and maybe that's why today seems so dull, like a sort of a sideways type of nothing so far. Um, I have a feeling when the Fed minutes come out, what they're going to say is that the Fed's essentially on hold, right? The last set of inflation numbers came in a little hot, and I don't think that they're in any hurry to lower rates. And the funny thing is, a lot of the narrative I mean, a lot of the narrative, and this, we're looking at, over 2 years here, but it's this particular rally that's, basically, I guess you could look at it and say, it kind of started back here in October 2022. That was a significant pullback. So somewhere here, right around the beginning of 2023, and I mean, here we are 2 years later, and it's basically been just a march higher with a couple of relatively minor pullbacks in between. So, um, but like as I pointed out on that other chart here, you got you basically, there's practically, well, let's see, you've got a year and about a year and a half. This rally was about Well, that rally was about a year and a half, and I suppose that you could say that this one is a year and a couple of months, right? So, that's kind of interesting. A year and a couple of months. So if this, and since I drew these lines on here, it kind of, you can't see the symmetry as well as you could back here, but anyway, I think you get the point. Year and a half, a year and a couple of months. So we're gonna see how what this current administration cutting back on government waste. We're gonna see how that affects things. I think the Fed's terrified because the unemployment rate is bound to go up. So unemployment rate's bound to go up. The economy's bound to slow, and part of that will be that maybe they will be forced to lower rates. That'll be interesting. All right, real quick, let's look at this chart of, I've been talking about this for a while. It's actually kind of amazing. I should probably pull it out of my list here because, yeah, here we go. Let's see what these look like. There's a chart I was looking for. The funny thing is, back over here, I used this as an example of just, how rough things potentially were outside of the Mag 7 and all that kind of stuff. But, um, a couple of years have gone by and I started getting pretty constructive on it, breaking out of this box. And lo and behold, there's a lot of potential here. I mean, it's pretty amazing to see ARK in the 60s when it was, in the 20s over here. So this is always it's funny, this entire period of time, I would always pull it up on the show here on the weekly chart and be like, well, it's trapped in this box, but, it's kind of looking like a bottoming pattern. The further you zoom out on it, really nice sort of rounding bottom pattern. And I never did extend the box all the way over here, but you can see that basically if I extend this box up, finally it broke out, and then here you go. Even just recently, it's broken above the 200-day moving average. I mean, just in the past few weeks here, and quite frankly, I mean, it looks like it's going to grind its way up a little bit higher. So it's just emerging from this. Speaking of which, I've seen a lot of chatter around Baidu lately. It's not Baidu, it's confused. Alibaba. Yeah, Alibaba. We looked at this a few times too. The funny thing is, I think it was last year. It was either last year or going into this year. This is another stock that a lot of people have looked at for sort of a beaten down type thing. What's amazing about this is this rally, like at the end, towards the end of last year, last October, that came all the way back in, and then I guess someone's taken a big position in this thing because like right at the beginning of this year, boy, it just took off and it's made a humongous move. just in the past few weeks, as you can see here. So there's another one with sort of a multi-year rounding base. To me, the most interesting thing is this weekly pattern here from the fourth quarter of last year, because it made a big move, kind of like what it's making right now, and then just came all the way back in, and that's which it did a couple of times. It made a couple of false moves, but anyway, it's obviously it's probably gone now, but the other one that's just blowing everybody's mind is Palantir, which CEO was on CNBC yesterday. Um, because even back here, theoretically, based on sales, I mean the market cap compared to, and this is kind of reminiscent of the whole dot-com bubble, is, I mean, great company, great prospects, all kinds of stuff, but the price to sales ratio, price to earnings, price, I mean, even but the price to sales that's a pretty decent metric, because if you got a company that's doing X million a year, and their stock is valued in the tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars, that's well, it's kind of like Tesla, I suppose. Tesla being bigger than the market cap of all the other automobile manufacturers combined. Yeah, Tesla had I mean, there was the humongous run up, and now it's coming back in. So, and it wouldn't be a show if we didn't take a look at Nvidia. And by the way, I'm going to make today kind of quick because I got some things to take care of. But yeah, Nvidia's been sort of all over the map. I mean, it's getting fast and loose, and this current pattern looks very similar to the pattern mid-year last year, right? And so in theory, I mean, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell based on the pattern. So you had that spike, you had that sort of big move down, like significant spike down, and then subsequent rally, and then there was another trip lower. And so it kind of seems like if it repeats this pattern, there's probably going to be one more trip down, and in theory, that could be the buy zone, right? And this is just hypothetical. Obviously, we're looking at a weekly chart here, but hypothetically speaking, um, and that's probably too long of a thing, but if one were looking to take a position in Nvidia, and this is assuming that this is going to play out in a similar manner as this did, right? So it's assuming that there's some symmetry to this pattern. Basically, eh, maybe it's not going to go down that low, but I think you get the idea, right? The idea is that, if there's some symmetry to this pattern, you had that first big thrust down, which marked the low, and you would assume that that's the low. And so there's a couple ways to play it, but here we go, trend line. So assuming that was the low, what you'd want to do is, and assuming that's the low, you look for a move down into, say, that area, and that's where you'd look to get in. Now, obviously, it's gonna end up manifesting slightly different, but I think you get the idea. But and the funny thing is, once I start drawing this stuff on the chart, then it looks a little like I start to lose the symmetry, but I think you can see it there. So I think you get the idea what I'm talking about. There's every possibility that you don't get that big thrust down. There's a 50-day moving average. There's every possibility that we don't see that. And of course, this is a weekly chart, so I mean anything could happen. It could take till spring to get that sort of a move down. I'm going to save this chart just for the fun of it. Um, just for the fun of it. Chart name, NVIDIA Weekly. Yeah, we'll come back and we'll check that out. Come back and check this out, sort of maybe on a weekly basis. Well, I'll fix it up. I like my lines to be nice and straight, so there we go. Straighten that up since I decided to save this. So there we go. Anyway, real quick, let's look at a weekly chart of the Russell. Come on, Russell 2000. There we go. Weekly chart of the Russell. This is, I think we talked about this last week too. And of course, as I keep saying, nothing happens fast on the weekly chart. But this is one big giant multi-year sort of cup pattern. And quite frankly, I mean, we could spend the next few weeks, it could poke down whatever, but it looks like eventually it's wants to resolve to the upside. Even in the short term on this, and of course, it's kind of, you talk about a boring sort of index, but even in the short term on the weekly time frame, there's potential for all it's got to do is just make a move up through there, right? This is, if this is a big giant cup, this is not really a handle yet, but sometimes these cupping patterns, they just consolidate, and then you can see it's sort of set up to break out to new highs. And so in theory, that would probably be a good thing for the smaller cap stocks to kind of take over. Anyway, I got a bunch of stuff going on today, and the market is sort of a snooze. It really is. The weather's bad. It's rainy here, and it's hard to get too excited about anything until, and of course there'll be some action, but these past couple of days, so, well, I should say, what's that, Friday? And then, day before 3-day weekend, and then the Tuesday. Yesterday was like really super boring, and then all of a sudden at the very end of the day, I mean, like, what was it, like the last 10 minutes, the market just exploded higher after not doing anything all day. So today's just sort of a snooze fest so far, and we'll just have to see what happens. But, in the daily chart from day to day, everybody's just kind of waiting on news, so. But anyway, so, we're still trapped in this box and just looking for price to break out to the upside and make one of these trend moves, or, something to happen that sends it back down to retest the lower end of this, or even this trend line here. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. I will see you back here, same time, same place next week.